Welcome to the Boomer Briefing Podcast, where we help you solve a critical business issue in 20 minutes or less. I'm your host, Jon Hubbard, shareholder and consultant here at Boomer Consulting. And with me today is Arianna. Hi, Arianna. Thank you for being on this episode of the podcast.
Hi, Jon. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Arianna is one of our shareholders as well, and our consultants, and really specializes in several different areas, one of which is talent, process, and change management, lots of other things. So we have a great topic here on how to address talent constraints. You know, Arianna, we have 7 consultants here at Boomer. Any given week, we are in a handful of firms working with them on various issues. One of the most common topics right now, no matter what the context is talent constraints. So I think this episode is going to be timely. So, speak a little bit about what firms have been experiencing due to some of their talent constraints.
And so I think what we're seeing isn't going to be a surprise for listeners to hear, but, we're really hearing comments around just employees across the board, just being burnt out and just really feeling like they're overworked and overwhelmed. We're experiencing or hearing firms talk about there being lower morale within their teams. So that impacts the ways that those teams are working together, the way that teams are being productive, the way that they're getting the work done. And it ultimately impacts client service. I think when you look at talent constraints from the growth opportunities, it really tends to limit those opportunities for professional growth when you have talent constraints, because there isn't that time for the training and growth and development. And ultimately what we're seeing is that people are leaving their current jobs. Some of that is that they're going to other firms, but there are also those who are just altogether leaving for other careers. And so I think that one of the bigger impacts is that it just creates less cheerleaders for the profession, right? Those talent constraints really lessen the excitement around coming into the profession at a time where we really know that we need to be recruiting and retaining our talent.
It's a compounding problem, right? You can't find enough talent, therefore you're overworking your staff. It's hard, which makes retention difficult, which then has all these ripple effects in the other areas you mentioned. So as you've talked with firms about this topic, whether that is in one of our circle meetings, maybe one of your training sessions, or just in kind of a one-on-one consulting engagement with a firm, what are some strategies you've seen firms use, or maybe strategies you're recommending firms use to help kind of alleviate or navigate the talent constraints they're facing?
Yeah, so there are 5 different things that we've really seen firms focus on to start to make some progress in addressing talent constraints. And we all know that none of these things are going to alleviate the issue overnight. So it really takes having a strategic approach that incorporates these 5 things. So the first thing is really looking at automation. We need to make sure that we're considering our technology as one of our talent team members, and we don't want to leave our technology sitting on the bench. So we want to be looking for ways to really use our technology to automate those repetitive tasks that are better served for our technology to be doing those. And we need to make sure that we are looking throughout our different processes within the firm to say, where are there different opportunities to take those repetitive tasks? And remember, we're not looking to automate people out of their roles. What we're looking to do is to create capacity within their roles so that they can focus on other things. So that would be the first one. We need to look at automation. The second one to look at is outsourcing. So lots of times when people hear the word outsourcing, immediately they think about, offshoring, and that being for large firms with big budgets. But there are a lot of different approaches to outsourcing. One of them is, looking at offshore resources, but there are also onshore resources, as well as looking at freelancers, looking at gig workers, looking at outsourcing internally, where you look at maybe be, for example, how your operations team can take on tasks and roles that were maybe more into other departments. So you're taking, again, tasks and roles that can be done by another party, and again, creating capacity for people within the firm to help alleviate some of those talent constraints. The third one is process improvement. So many times our people are doing tasks, when we really take a step back and look at our processes, they're doing tasks that don't add value. So if we can look at our processes and really take out those steps that aren't adding value, it's going to give them a chance to focus on the tasks that actually do provide value, both internally and externally. And that helps to alleviate not only some of those talent constraints, but the stress that we talked about earlier and the burnout, because when you're doing things just for the sake of doing them, or because that's the way it's always been done, that can cause burnout. The fourth is delegation. So really looking at how can we have everyone at their best and highest use, because many times talent constraints happen from just not having the right people in the right roles doing the right work at the right time. So how can we look at delegation to help with that? And looking at delegation not as I just want to get this stuff off my plate or a game of hot potato, but really as learning and growth opportunities that can help people to really take those tasks, own them, and excel in them. And then the last one is client filtering. So some of our talent constraints are caused by the fact that we aren't we haven't taken the time to filter or cull our client list. So we're putting a lot of efforts and resources into clients that really don't align with the ideal or target for the firm. So if we can start to really alleviate some of those, really look at our client list and start to alleviate some of those constraints, that's going to help us to have our talent be more effective. So again, the five that I would mention are automation, outsourcing, process improvement, delegation, and client filtering.
All those are great, Arianna. And I know you can give a keynote presentation on each of those individually. And we do want to keep this 20 minutes or less. So I'm going to make sure I don't ask too many questions, because there's a lot here. But, when I think about specific problems firms are having as it relates to talent, I feel like they could kind of almost pull out these five options and say, okay, which of these five options makes the most sense here? So we don't maybe try and solve this problem a way we did 2 years ago, and we still have this problem. And it gets people to think differently, so for example, sometimes right now we're seeing individuals at firms at too high of a level doing too low of work. Right. There's just a mismatch of kind of maybe partners doing work that they shouldn't be doing. And sometimes it could be tempting to say, well, that's just the way things are right now because there's not enough talent, But in reality, taking a look at your five recommendations there, or your five opportunities, and saying, hey, how is automation applicable in this situation? How is outsourcing an opportunity for us as it relates to this? Where do we need to improve processes so this doesn't happen? What could be delegated? Are these even the types of clients we want to be working on? Right? That whole situation. So I love your five kind of strategies there, because they can be applied to kind of each individual situation a firm's dealing with.
And where we see firms being most successful is a strategic application of all five. So it's also looking at, so you're not going necessarily full throttle with all five at the same time, but it's saying either what makes sense from a prioritization to go in which order for approaching those. We're approaching these. Maybe I need to start with process improvement, and from there, I'll determine what automation and outsourcing opportunities I have. And then we can focus on delegation and client filtering. or it's that they are looking at all of these, but with a different intensity. So maybe they have a really concerted effort at client filtering this year, while they're also doing some work on, process improvement by looking at what they can optimize and then doing research on automation and outsourcing. But it has to go back to a strategy of what's going to work for your firm and really considering how all five of these come into play. Because if you're not at least considering all five of these, you're leaving opportunity on the table.
Yep. So as you've seen firms kind of make strides in these areas, just like most things, there are some firms that are further ahead in these strategies than other firms. And even within one firm, maybe they're further ahead implementing one of these strategies, of another, when you compare it to another strategy. So speak a little bit about what are some of the successes you've actually seen come through as firms start to apply some of these?
Yeah, so I was working with a firm recently who really had some concerns about the feedback that they had gotten on their employee surveys. So they had sent out, an employee survey to really get their finger on the pulse of the morale and the collaboration and the overall how people were feeling about how they were contributing to the firm with opportunities for growth and things like that. And it was really, I'd use the word alarming to them at the feedback that they had gotten. So they put together a strategy of how can we really address these talent constraints that we're seeing, because we know that talent constraints are at the heart of this feedback that we're getting. And so they took some time to put that strategy together. They communicated to their staff that this is top of mind for us. This is, from a leadership perspective, one of our number one priorities. They included people in the conversation to put together that strategic approach. And then they walked through their approach to how they were going to look at the automation, outsourcing, process improvement, delegation, and client filtering. And then when they resurveyed their employees, they saw a significant increase in the results that they got, not only in the number scores, but in the open-ended comments. People saying things about the difference that it was making for them, not only professionally, but personally, because we have to remember that these talent constraints aren't just confined to people's professional lives, they have ripple effect into their personal lives. So when we think about those results, really having happier employees, more productive employees, employees that are taking more ownership and accountability because they aren't feeling as burned out. So obviously you're going to see more retention with that as well. And then also you're going to be able to attract new people, because once they see that the firm is addressing this and that things are getting better, they are going to tell other people who can then be candidates to come and work at the firm. So it's definitely worth the effort of addressing the talent constraints, but just reiterating, you should put together a strategy that includes these five considerations.
And I love that you highlighted kind of that personal aspect, because when you really drill down into this, the reason there's a talent constraint in our profession is because there are personal decisions being made within individuals that are saying the accounting profession is not for me, or I don't want to work like this, so I'm leaving the firm, or I don't see a path forward, or all sorts of things. And the talent constraint is the symptom of that. And so I love that you were highlighting that, because sometimes firms just completely overlook that, and they look at everything from a business lens and forget that there are humans and individuals and personal goals and desires and wishes for their lives, which one piece of their life is their career path.
Absolutely.
So I think that's great. The other thing too that I really like about what you said there is kind of bringing a group of people within the firm from different functions or areas and coming up with that strategy, around this. Within a 3-week period, I facilitated our marketing circle and I facilitated our talent circle. I was one of the facilitators for both. Guess what was a topic that both groups were talking about? Talent constraints. So on the marketing side, people were saying, hey, there's an opportunity for us to do a better job at client filtering and targeting clients. So we can better focus our resources on those types of clients. And the talent, professionals, I mean, they have it rough right now trying to find talent. And they're like, we are spending all this energy trying to staff, clients essentially that maybe the firm doesn't want anymore. But we're putting all these dollars and resources into attracting individuals to the firm. And all we're hearing is we have too many clients. And so I like how you're just kind of emphasizing the multiple lenses in which to look at this issue, and having individuals and leaders within firms being able to tackle those issues together. Now, something we always ask is, on this podcast is, how is this topic relevant outside the profession? Is there anything you're seeing outside the profession, outside of maybe the four walls of accounting firms today, as it relates to talent constraints that you think is important for our listeners to know?
I think one of the most important things to think about as we're, looking outside of the profession is the whole idea around the impact of hybrid or remote work, and realizing that how that plays into talent constraints, and also realizing that this isn't anything that's going to go away. It's going to continue. People are going to be working differently. And so when you think about those 5 different approaches, they also support the hybrid workplace. And we're seeing other, industries that have been kind of more accelerated in their adoption of the hybrid workforce, looking at these different aspects. So I guess my point to that is that we know that these strategies work, especially when we apply them thoughtfully within our firms, because we can look at what's happening outside the profession. And I think we will continue to see organizations both outside of the profession and then firms within the profession looking at ways to really address talent constraints within that remote or hybrid environment. And it takes just looking at things differently. We can't be hoping that we can go back to the way that things used to be done. There are obviously successes and things that we did well that we want to pull forward, but we really want to look at what is our new way of work, because talent constraints are just a part of a bigger opportunity to change the way that the work's being done. So addressing those talent constraints is just one piece of that puzzle.
Great. All right, Arianna. Well, this has been a great conversation. And as we round out this episode here, we always kind of end with, what's the next step someone should take? Let's say someone's kind of commuting to the office right now, listening to this podcast, and they maybe want to have a conversation or two with people once they get into the office about this topic. What are maybe your recommendations on some next steps they should take?
So 2 things. I think the first thing is to get the conversation started by having feedback from your talent and really hearing their voices and finding out how the constraints are impacting them. And, that conversation can start in 2 ways. It can be started by our staff and team members, or it can be started at the leadership level, which leads to kind of the other thing that I would recommend is making sure that there is a strategy being talked about and put into place at the leadership level, and then communicating that out to the rest of the firm, because people need to know that this is top of mind, and that even if you don't have all the answers, that it is really important for, from a leadership level to figure out the best ways to address this. Think about those 5 areas that I listed, or 5 opportunities that I listed, and put together a plan.
Awesome. Well, Arianna, as always, thank you for being on this episode of the Boomer Briefing podcast. And for our listeners, if you like this topic, like this discussion, we release new episodes every Tuesday morning. This week, it was on talent. Next week, it may be on growth or leadership or technology or process. But the common theme among all these topics is that they are critical to your organization's success. As always, thanks for listening, and please subscribe.